Welcome to Male Anatomy and Physiology, really. Here we're going to talk about microanatomy and then go all the way out to macroanatomy, so from smallest to largest. And we're going to add some physiology on how we actually create those sex cell gametes and the specific names that we use along those processes and what cells are involved in helping do that and what hormones are helping those cells help us do that. So I would recommend having one sheet of notes or however many sheets of notes for just males and then another sheets of notes for just females. Let's go ahead and take it on from there. So for male anatomy, and I'm going to jump around a little bit in this chapter, I apologize, but for the most part, the male anatomy goes through it goes through the right order. For female anatomy, I might jump around a little bit. So let's start with microanatomy. So we start in the scrotum, and the scrotum is divided into two chambers via the raphe of the scrotum. And let's go ahead and draw that out. Lovely. So let me actually zoom out a little bit so I can write. Oh, here, I'll do it down here. Okay, so here's scrotum. And the raphe of the scrotum is going to separate out the two in between, or the two testes. So raphe, scrotum. Then we'll have a series of layers of tissue that will be a part of the testes, and they will, really similarly to the kidney, they will section off areas of really highly folded structures. So let's talk about just the structure of the scrotum itself and then zoom in a couple layers in. So after the raphe scrotum, we're going to have a muscular layer that I'll draw here in red. Oh goodness. And this is going to be a muscle called dartos muscle. Dartos is going to help with the let's add the next muscle and I'll talk about them together. So next muscle underneath dartos muscle is called the cremaster muscle. Okay, so the cremaster muscle its responsibility is to bring the testes closer to the pelvis whenever the testes are exposed to a really cold environment. So the testes are outside of the male pelvis because the testes are producing sperm, and that temperature that the sperm need to be produced in needs to be a couple degrees colder than what the average body temperature is on the inside. So the testes actually descend during development, or during childhood, and eventually they protrude past in the pelvis. And the cremaster muscle is going to help pull those testes back up to the pelvis if it's really, really cold. So imagine a male going swimming in the ocean. As soon as the male goes into the really cold ocean, the testes are going to ascend superiorly and go back up to the pelvis. And then whenever the male goes out and sunbathes, for example, then the cremaster muscle will relax. The dartos muscle helps the cremaster muscle, but it's more responsible for the actual the skin of the scrotum itself. So the dartos muscle can contract as well to gather the skin cells of the scrotum, or it can relax and make it a little bit more stretched out. Okay, then we have tunica vaginalis, which is next, so I'm going to draw that in blue. Okay, tunica vaginalis. Okay, why is it named vaginalis? It's not a vagina. Great question. So whenever we talk about invagination, we're talking about something folding in on itself. So this is one of those first layers that is actually part of the tissues that were in the abdomen that descended with the testes during development. So the descent of the testes, we actually start with what we call a gubernaculum. You don't need to know that term. It's just really fun to say. And the gubernaculum then descends and takes part of the peritoneum of the abdomen down with it. And whenever it takes part of that peritoneum, as it's developing and descending, that peritoneum separates into a couple different layers, like tunica vaginalis and tunica albiginea. So tunica vaginalis is that more superficial layer, and that is a serous membrane that is going to separate the inner from the outer surface of the testes. So now we're really talking about testes. The next layer is going to be tunica albiginea, or however you want to pronounce that. I apologize if you know and I'm totally butchering it. Oh my goodness, tunica albiginea. Okay, this is a thicker layer of connective tissue. It's going to support blood vessels and lymphatics, and the efferent ductules, which we'll talk about those. And the tunica albiginea is going to form subsections that will begin the entrance to the epididymis, called the septa testes. I have a better picture of this in the next slide, and we'll draw a better picture of this as well. Okay, and we already talked about the last bullet point here. I really like this image. I pulled this image off the interwebs. I think it does a really good job of showing you everything just in a better view. I couldn't find a better view in your textbook, so I hope that this will be useful for you. We'll go ahead and draw our own version of it next, so we can look at the more microscopic anatomy. So let's go ahead and take that tunica albiginea, and let's go ahead and zoom in on that. So I'm going to draw it kind of like a kidney bean. And that's still our tunica albiginea. Okay, and so now we're looking at the testes. One testes, we don't need to draw both. And in the testes, we're going to have seminiferous tubules. And in the seminiferous tubules is where sperm production is actually taking place. So let's go ahead and draw those. And I'm going to draw those in green. Oh, actually, one thing with the pink. So the pink is going to help make subsections of the testes, so that we can separate out some of the seminiferous tubules. So I'm going to draw the seminiferous tubules like this, and their tubes. So they're going to have, they need to have a lumen. And I'm only going to draw a couple, but in reality, they're like folded in on themselves like this. Like it's a lot. And then another tube over here, and it winds out like this. And if you actually look under a microscope of these, they look quite honestly quite like this. And the images and the cartoonistic depictions are pretty accurate as well. So these are going to be our seminiferous tubules. Seminiferous tubules. Okay, and this is where sperm is actually beginning to be created. So at the end of the seminiferous tubules, then they turn into straight tubules. So I'm going to draw that in a darker green. So all these go straight at some point. Doom, 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 doom. Okay, so those are our straight tubules. So as you can imagine, as the sperm are made in the seminiferous tubules, then they travel through the straight tubules, and then the straight tubules all meet in the center, called rete testi. All right. Then the rete testi is like a funnel, and that will funnel into what we call the efferent ductules. So I'm just going to kind of draw them like this. But they're ducts, so they have, you can draw them like tubes. Okay, so efferent ductules. Okay, so efferent meaning away, right? They're leaving. Okay, and the efferent ductules are going to dump the sperm into the epididymis. And epididymis I'll draw in orange like this. Okay. Epididymis. Okay, and the epididymis has three parts. It has a head, which is most superior. It has a body. And then it has a tail. That'll be important whenever we start talking about the maturation of the sperm. And then the tail of the epididymis then turns into, let me do that in another color, that turns into the ductus deferens. This is bilateral, so I'm just drawing one side. Ductus deferens. Oh, I thought it was vas deferens. Why are you saying ductus deferens? Vas deferens is an old term, and that is being phased out, so it's ductus deferens. Okay. All right, so let's take a second here and stop for a second and talk about what we just did. So we went from the scrotum, and we are zooming into the testy, and we see the tunica albuginea, and within the tunica albuginea, then we have the seminiferous tubules. This is where sperm are being made. Whenever they're being made, then they go through the straight tubules, then they go to the rete testes, then they go out to the efferent ductules, and then they go in the epididymis, and then they do some things in the epididymis, and then they leave through the ductus deferens. All right. Here on your slide, the picture A has a like a slice through the seminiferous tubules. So you can see that there's a space in the middle of the tubule and there's a bunch of different ones. So like I said, it's really similar to the nephron in that everything is kind of folded in on itself. And on the right is a zoomed in picture of what that looks like. So let's go ahead and draw that as well. So I'm going to keep my colors the same if I can. If I remember what color I used. Okay, perfect. So my seminiferous tubule, I'm going to zoom in here. So as if I took like a knife and I cut through it and I'm looking through the tube. So I'm going to go ahead and draw a circle. Okay, and then, excuse me, in the center we're going to have some sort of space. So this is just arbitrary. There's no actual like line here, but this is going to be the lumen. And the way sperm mature is they actually travel from the outside towards the lumen. So they start on the outside of the seminiferous tubule, or the lining of the seminiferous tubule, and then they move towards the lumen, deep into the lumen. And so we are going to start with spermatogonia out here, spermatogonia out here, and then when we finally enter into the lumen, we are going to be spermatids. And we'll talk about that process. In the seminiferous tubule, we're going to have some supporting cells, like some orange ones, and I'm just going to put them arbitrarily. We have better pictures of them coming up. And in orange, I'm going to call these interstitial cells, formerly called Leydig cells. Okay. And then we're going to add some additional cells that are going to come and help. Let's do that in this color. Da-doom, 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 da-doom. Okay, and these are going to be nurse cells, and formerly called Sertoli. Okay, and generally, and we're going to give a lot more detail to this, but generally the whole point, so we'll talk about this in more detail, but for now, if you wanted to add this here, the Sertoli cells are the ones that are promoting spermatogenesis. And the interstitial cells are making testosterone, so T.